At dawn on Thursday morning, Frederick John Harris was executed in Pretoria for the murder of Mrs. Ethel Rees, 78, in the Johannesburg station bomb explosion. But that is not the end. No final curtain was drawn with the execution of John Harris. His young widow lives on. So does his infant son. Little Dennis Burley, severely injured in the explosion, faces years of medical treatment. The conflicts that played upon the mind of the ill-fated schoolteacher John Harris are fresh in the memory of all. In this poignant drama lies a story of tragedy, folly, hope, and despair. Now, in her own statement to the Sunday Times, 26-year-old Anne Harris speaks of her last hours with her husband and of her life with him.
People ask me if I will change my name, but I will not. I was the wife of John Harris, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, and I will not desert him now. For whatever has befallen him, he was my husband. I love him still.
John Harris, the friend and fellow undergraduate whom I'd persuaded to join our sabotage group. Few actions could have had more political impact than planting a bomb at the whites-only terminal of Park Station, and at rush hour. Well, nothing could have defined more clearly the desperation of the time. Such a lonely act, so out of time and place. And though none of the rest of us had anything directly to do with the bomb, it came to symbolize our activities and signified for all of us the end of our particular struggle, and more dramatically than any other action could have done.
I learned that our plea for mercy had failed and that John was to die when I went to visit him on Monday afternoon. I couldn't speak. John was very worried about me, and he had, by then, of course, been told that he was to die on Thursday. He appeared unconcerned about himself, and his only thought was to comfort me.
Could we really say that we were not involved with the bomb at the station? And what would I have done if it had been me and not John left alone outside with the rest of our group either detained or gone? I did not plant that bomb. I didn't know anything about it. I hope that I would have had the strength to oppose the idea if anyone had suggested it. But there is something I can't deny. Before I was detained, I gave John the information he needed to continue our activities.
Having placed the bomb on the whites-only platform at Johannesburg Station, in order to avoid loss of life and injury to commuters, John Harris made 3 warning phone calls from the Jappy Street post office. And so, in the late afternoon of the 24th of July 1964, the railway police and 2 newspapers, the Rand Daily Mail and the Die Transvaal, received a short message by phone. The message given to each was much the same. Listen carefully, this is an important message. This is the African resistance movement. Can you hear me? There is a time bomb somewhere in the main concourse of the Johannesburg station. On the handle of the suitcase is a label bearing the words, "Back in 10 minutes." It will go off at 4:33. Don't touch it. It is not our intention to harm anyone. Clear the concourse by using the public address system at once. In spite of these warnings, no action was taken by the authorities to trace the suitcase or to clear the concourse of the rush hour crowd.
At 4:33 p.m. precisely, it exploded with hideous effect under the whites-only bench in the shelter at the top of the stairs leading to platforms 5 and 6. At least 23 commuters were badly injured. They included a 12-year-old, Glynis, who was permanently disfigured, and her 77-year-old grandmother, who died of her injuries 6 weeks later. In terms of how one feels, what can you say?
And then Ernie got a phone call from John Harris saying, please come and see me. He'd been badly beaten up by then. And Ernie said to me, he just couldn't, he was too ill and he was too frightened and he just couldn't do it. But next morning he woke up and thought he simply had to go and see him. So he never got to hospital. He did go to see John, he and Ruth Hayman. And John was, his jaw had been broken, it had been wired up. His balls were black because of torture. And he said to Ernie, please, Ernie, don't let them hang me. And he asked Ernie, please, to defend him. And Ernie was too emotionally involved. He said, I can't do it. He was actually furious with John. But he did stand by him. And he had to spend the next 2 weeks with Ruth Hayman going up and down the bar trying to get someone to agree to defend him, and people were reluctant. But eventually, Naomi Phillips agreed to do so, and so did David Soggett. People were frightened to be associated with John in any way. But Ernie went to see him often and stood by him when he got the death penalty.
On Wednesday morning, the day before the execution, I saw John for 90 minutes. I was with him again for 2 hours in the afternoon. I took our son David just to see him. He played happily with the screen and crawled around on the prison floor. How can I describe the moment when the last visit was up and it was time to leave?
The saddest thing about John Harris and the station bomb is that in any other time and in most other places, John would probably have been found guilty of manslaughter. But not so John in July 1964. He was never going to beat the rope. They wanted him, you see, as a prize exhibit to beat into submission anyone opposing the great apartheid dream. They wanted John dead.
I met John when I was 16. I was a matric student at a convent. He was 17 and working. He was studying for an engineering degree at Wits, but had decided that he wanted to teach and was waiting until he could go back and study for a teaching degree. I hadn't been out with many boys, and those I met at church socials bored me. But John was different. He was interested in books, and so was I, and we talked books the whole time, the first day we met. After that, I often saw John.
I knew him. He was a good friend. I liked him. He suffered most terribly, you know, through all those events surrounding his death.
We spent much of our time together, but we couldn't go out at night or to parties because my parents were antagonistic towards John. They were religious, and he was an atheist. In April 1959, we were married. I turned 21 3 days before our wedding. It upset me that my family did not come to my wedding. In 1960, John and I went to England and he began studying at Oxford. We had saved enough for this and I took a job to provide for our living expenses. We could have stayed in England, but we wanted to come back to South Africa. John felt very strongly about the political situation in South Africa and he wanted to take an active part and try to change things. Within the first week of our return, John became active in the Liberal Party. By 1962, he was serving on the executive and national committee of the Liberal Party.
He was an organiser's heaven on wheels, John Harris, because he was prepared to do almost anything you asked him, and he always landed up doing all the dirty work, the really hard stuff. You know, we used to have to go, we never had any money for transport or anything. People just had to get in their cars and go when things had to be done. And he was terribly generous with his petrol money and his time, and was prepared to go all over the place.
John was the person we knew as the breathless one, never at a loss for words. He was always scurrying around after new ideas, new answers, new projects, like a dog after a bone. He was never able to stop, John Harris. He was unable to quit.
I remember one day, one of our members had a child in the Transkei and had been unable to pay the school fees of the school there, and the school had just kept the child at the school in the holidays, wouldn't release her and held her hostage. And it was in the middle of his sister's 21st birthday, I think. He just got in his, what did he have, a car, a combi. He just drove to the Transkei and got out. That was John.
In 1963, John learned of the newly formed SANROC, a South African non-racial Olympic committee, and immediately he felt he might be able to do some valuable work there to bring about a change in attitude among white South Africans. He was made vice chairman of the organization, and in this capacity he visited the Olympic Games held in Rome, Lauserne and in London.
John was the friend who took over SANROC responsibilities from me. And in fact, it was John who was successful in getting the South African all-white Olympic team banned from the 1964 Tokyo Summer Olympics. And it was after that I recruited John into ARM.
In September 1963, he was prevented at the last moment from going to the Baden-Baden meeting of the International Olympic Committee, and last year he was served with a banning order.
We didn't really know what Anne was thinking. She certainly did whatever John said. He was a very clever man. He was one of the quiz kids. She was a teacher herself, I think. She was with John. But she was a serene and patient person. She was just the most extraordinarily nice person.
John felt terribly deeply about the situation in South Africa, and he felt passionately that he must fight for what he believed to be justice, and he gave his time and his energy and everything he had towards this.
Never a word of complaint, and that was Anne, throughout the trial also.
Yes, he was moody and often became depressed. He had a bad temper, and at times that made me cry. But when I had to stand up in court and dissect his personality, it was a terribly difficult thing to do, because to me, he was just John. The complete and familiar personality, the man I had loved and married. I know, without a doubt, that my husband did not mean to kill or injure anyone by his action at Johannesburg Station on July 24.
There I was, that last morning before my detention, telling him it's all over, it's finished, there's nothing more to do. And in fact, I also told him where we had stored the dynamite. Now I was, as he saw it, I think, handing over the baton, but saying, sit tight, do nothing. From John's point of view, why stop now? He'd never stopped before. So it was John's chance to show his mettle, and this wasn't just an opportunity to him, but a duty. It was precisely what he wanted. We gave him the baton, but with no suggestion to do anything, but equally no suggestion not to do anything. And the truth is that I should have known that John would not do nothing.
John now saw himself as standing alone. All the other people he had been involved with were in jail or had fled. I think he felt in this position that he could not remain silent. And now John is dead.
John Harris, the final spear carrier of the African resistance movement, died alone. The rest of us, I suppose, were lucky in that we survived.
He always said he was an atheist, of course. But Father McGuinness and he were very good friends. Father McGuinness walked with him to his execution.
One of few friends that stuck by him, as did Father McGuinness, so too Ernie Wenzel supported John Harris throughout his trial and was with him on death row the day before his execution.
He was very calm and very brave. He said that Father McGuinness had said he would be there with him and would pray for him, but that he remained an atheist. He was very grateful for Father McGuinness's help. I don't think Ernie spoke to me much about what they said. He was pretty shattered.
I was in Rome, of all places. These are my personal letters from Father McGuinness, because he wrote to me every week. Dear Sister Catherine, I thought I'd wait a little before writing to you. It's the 7th of April. I thought I'd wait a little before writing to you to collect my thoughts and try and find out where I had failed with John. He always thought he should bring him to Christ.
And we vigiled the night he was executed, and it was just terrible to leave Johannesburg. As John's father said, that we all left Johannesburg while he was alive in order to attend his funeral next day.
At 5 a.m. I went up to the jail, and John was in quite a good mood, not at all frightened or depressed. We were surrounded by warders, and again he mentioned this matter of forgiveness, and told me that he had no hard feelings or bitterness. Just then, one of the warders came in to say goodbye to him, and John shook hands with him, and he said to me, I meant that about forgiveness. He is one of them who did me a dirty trick. Then the executioner came, and John shook hands with him and the other warders, and last of all with me. And then he went to his death singing, We Shall Overcome.
At 5:30 a.m. on Thursday morning, at the time I knew that John's execution was taking place, I lay alone in my bedroom, my thoughts fixed on him, feeling very, very close to him. We have always been close, but in the last 2 days before he died, John and I found a special closeness.
And we vigiled with Father McGuinness that night. And then in the morning he said a prayer and he went off to John's execution. And he came back and he said, Well, your friend died very well indeed. Over breakfast, singing We Shall Overcome. It was horrible. You know, we were all hated the death penalty as it was. But to have your friend executed was pretty awful.
I am told that John died without bitterness. He died deeply regretting the harm that had come to the innocent victims of his act. He died forgiving the treatment meted out to him while he was detained. He held no malice towards his former friends and colleagues who gave evidence against him when they appeared as state witnesses in the case. Peter, the 15-year-old son of the Haynes with who I have been staying, also read a Bible verse from Ecclesiastes. In his address, Peter said, "We are gathered here today out of respect for John, whom we all knew with love and affection. Though John is gone from us, he will live on in our thoughts and our memories, for the knowledge of him, of his presence, will remain always with those who knew him. John will live on also in his son David, for to know David is to see his father looking out again through his son's eyes at a new and wonderful world."
He spent that last night writing letters, to Anne, of course, to you, to his parents, to me and one or two others. I have not received any letter, nor has Anne, nor anyone else. I told him that I doubted very much whether she would get the letter. The authorities will just not let it out.
Now I will have to make plans for the future. I have not even started to do that yet. John made a will, but I have not seen it. His books were his most valuable possessions, and I have those. There is little else.
I nearly forgot. John did get Christ the Sacrament. Oh, that's the book I must have sent him. I can't remember. But of course, had no time to finish it. I know you're praying for John and for Anne too. And just remember to say one for me also. God bless. John McGuinness.
Many people have been very kind, complete strangers. I would like to thank them for their kindness and tell them how much it has meant to me. We have also received threatening and abusive calls. The last call before John died, it came through late on Wednesday night. It was from an anonymous caller who told Adeline Hayne, "I hope you hang with Harris." The first we had in the morning was from another anonymous caller who said to her, "You are next on the list." But these are things I shall forget. There is so very much I shall remember.
They refused to give the ashes to my sister or his family. My sister, they refused absolutely. So that all those years my sister didn't know, or Jane, John's sister, or his mother, poor Mrs. Harris, or his dad. They didn't know where he'd been buried, or if he'd been buried at all, or if his ashes had been discarded. We didn't know that. Eventually, in 1998, well, it's quite a long story, but I tracked down the reverend who is associated with prison services. He remembered Father McGuinness well, regarding him as a friend. In 1971, he was asked to bury John's ashes, which had been kept in the prison offices. The commander felt that respect for the dead was long overdue. And eventually I found a gardener and I asked him. And so there it was in the ground. And I thought it was much nicer than the pigeonholes along the wall. And so the stone, when I found it, just said John Harris and the date of his death. Did it say the date of his death? I can't remember. Just his name. And I thought the family would want to take up the ashes and make a memorial. But they didn't want to. Their concern was just his final request. That one day, in a new South Africa, on his memorial stone would be written, John Harris, true patriot.